Hello, everybody. James here. Storytime with Dutch, episode 23, and we've got Dutch turning around. Hey, there's the figure for the audio listeners. There's a doll of Zeb Colter waving at me, threatening me slightly as well.
Hell with him.
Well, okay, right. Let's forget the intro and everything. I want to ask something about the doll, because I ask a lot of people who I interview about merchandise and stuff like that, and how many units did you sell of your figures? What were the royalties like? You don't have to give me an exact number or anything, but what was the percentage of royalties you got for that kind of thing?
Very low. Since just because they sell tons and tons and tons of merchandise, that doesn't mean the talent actually gets all that money. Mm. I mean, one guy wrote a book, and he pushed it through WWE. And I don't know. Wait a minute.
Clang.
I'm all messed up here.
Shall I
Excuse
pause?
me, people. No, I'm okay now.
Okay.
But, and I asked a guy one time, I says, how much did you make on that? And I forgot. I'm trying to think of the guy who told me, and I can't remember, but you would know who he is. He says, he gave me this number. And I says, what? That's all you, it's like $10,000 or something, which sounds okay as a lump sum. But he sold a ton of books. I said, wait a minute, you sold. And I had the figure. I said, that's all you made on it? And he said, yeah. He said, you only get like $1.50 a book. I said, and you write the book? Yeah. He said, they do everything else. I says, well, I think $1.50 is not enough, because he sold like 50,000 books or something. I don't know. But anyway, whatever he sold, his return was very, very small in relation to what he sold. Now, of course, they got to go and they got to have it printed, and they got to have it shipped, and they got to do this. And I got all that. But they take the biggest chunk of it, and then you just get, I guess, a creator's fee or something. I don't know what you get.
You get shafted is what you get, especially when you go through a publisher, and then if you go through WWE through a publisher as well.
No kidding. But now Amazon, you can go to Amazon if you want. If there's any would-be authors out there, write the book. I don't give a crap what it's on. Write the book. Then you send it to Amazon, and they will print you a book. And they will print you a book according to how many pages in it for like $3 or $4. They'll print you a book. And then if you have to, well, yeah, and you'll have to promote it yourself. But then you get the bulk of what you sell. So if you only sell 1,000 copies, you might make at least $5,000. You make $5 on a book, even at a low price. I mean, if you think you got 1,000 people who would buy your book, then just put it out there. But you have to write it first. That's the main thing. I was reading this woman one time. She's talking about writing books. She said, don't think about it, do it. So I was thinking about writing my first one. So I just went and wrote it. And I didn't know what to do with it. And I had this friend, Mark James, who helped me edit my book. And my friend Rick, they helped me put the book together, and then I had it. And then 11 months later, I wrote another one. And now I'm writing the third one. I don't know. I don't have a name for it. I said somebody needs to write and suggest names, but I haven't had a name that really kind of urged me to name the book that. But anybody's got any ideas, you can write me Dirty Dutch Mantell with 2 L's at gmail.com.
And last time you mentioned that on a clip I posted, we got dozens and dozens of responses as well. So there might be some good ones. I got some emails as well. I'll send them over to you. Just because we were talking about merchandise, Was it only the figures that you got, or was it anything else? I mean, there was We the People T-shirts. Did you get a cut of those, or was it Jack
No,
Swagger? Who got
I
those
didn't. I didn't. I didn't get nothing of the T-shirt. They made one of a hand, but I think that's because they didn't make one and wouldn't make one, and the We the People gimmick got over. We'd walk out there, the people would stand up. And, knowing lazy people like I do, they don't stand up for no reason. But he finally had one made, and I need to ask him. I don't think he made much off that either. I know they had to sell some. And I told him one time, why don't you just make your own shirts? I said, why don't we make our own shirts and put our own table outside on the street? All they could do is they could come out there and shut you down because you're having you're selling a patented product, or they own it. And that's the thing, like the name's Zeb Colter. People still know me as that, but I cannot advertise myself as that because it was their idea. So it's in their domain on their platform. Therefore, the WWE owns it. And somebody asked me one time, and I may have talked about this before, what about We the People? I said, no, because if they could have, WWE, they would have taken We the People, but they can't take it because it's in the public domain. It's in the Constitution. We the People. We all Americans own We the People, and anybody can use it. So, but anyway, that's the thing about doing things on other people's platforms. They end up the owner of what you do. Now I've thought about podcast. I've done podcasts, but I don't own the podcast. I just do the podcast. But the person who did it, they own everything in it, right? Or no? Is that the way it works?
Yes. I mean, this does relate to me quite a lot, actually, doesn't it?
No, but I've done it before, and I used to do it for this one guy, and I don't know, 6 months of stuff, and he paid me a little bit, but he didn't promote it either, so he couldn't have made much money on it. And he kept wanting to do it, and I kept, because the podcasts were getting increasingly harder and harder and harder to do. So I finally said, I'm not interested in doing the podcast anymore. He said, no, it's doing good. I said, I'm not seeing any money on it, so I don't know how it's doing. So if you have another great idea, let me know, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. So, I mean, just for the record, I pay you better, don't I?
Oh, a lot better than what that guy was.
There you go.
That guy forgot to pay me one week. And I texted him, I said, hey man, what's up? I says, you forget something? No, I don't think so. I said, yeah, I think you did. And I didn't care if he paid me or not. I'm just playing with him. Really, it wasn't that much anyway. I said, where's my money? Oh, man, this come up. I said, well, why don't you just call yourself now a full-fledged wrestling promoter? Because that's who you're sounding like now. You're making excuses. You can't pay this. I said, forget it. And that's when I stepped away.
Oh.
I mean, no hard feelings. He wasn't making no money on it either. But don't tell me you're going to, compensate me so much and then forget me. That's disrespectful, I think.
Mm-hmm. I will. I think I've forgotten as well once or twice, but you're on the ball, and I actually do pay you. But I mean, I actually do forget. So
no, you're one of the good ones. So when I'm supposed to do this, the money is there.
There you go. I've got that on camera as well, and one of the good ones. Remember that. We're gonna be doing an hour's worth, or slightly under an hour's worth of questions from the fans, and I'm gonna get to it straight away. And the first one is Crash Davis. Please talk about the angle back in Memphis when Texas Dirt, aka you, won the Southern Belt but had to give it up because Dutch Mantell had been, well, I'm going to stop because I'm hoping Dutch will tell the story. One of my favourite angles ever. I was only a kid then.
Well, Crash, this is your lucky day. The Dirty Dutch had a match. I forgot with who, Jerry Lawler or somebody. I forgot. where if he didn't win, he'd have to leave town. And this angle's been done before in under various themes and characters. So to get the story to work, I mean, if I won, the story's over. But I didn't win. I think it was, I may have been Black Bart I had the match with. So I lose. But a week later, this new character shows up on videotape from Texas, and his name is Texas Dirt from Dirt, Texas. And he was riding on a tractor. And this is what I think about sometimes. Don't just show up at the TV as that character. Go actually take a camera and go make a little video outside the studio, which the people pay attention to. And Bill Dundee at the time come to find me because that big Black Bart had been bad-mouthing me, and I was supposed to be Dutch's cousin. And I said, and I'd changed my voice, put the mask on. If I knew this was going to be a question, we would have had a picture we could put up. But so I come back and I had the mustache down here like this, but I had a mask. It's an eating mask, and it comes all around here. It's wide around the mouth, so I could put the mustache in there. And everybody says, it's you, Dutch, it's you. And the people, they enjoyed it because they knew it was me anyway.
There you go.
And that's Texas Dirt right there. And on the shirt, he says, Dutch says hi. And we took it around about, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. But you never worn a mask, have you, other than the pandemic?
Well, I have quite a lot of wrestling masks that I've got adorned on the back. I may have worn one or two. I won't tell you under what circumstances they were worn. But
okay.
But I actually have, yeah.
Yeah, but wrestling in a mask is totally different. And I did it for about 6 weeks. And all of a sudden, I won a match so Dutch could come back. Texas Dirt won the match, and he was going back to Texas. And this time I'm in the video. I'm driving the car because we shoot the two cameras. I said, well, Dutch, Texas Dirt, what are you going to do now? I said, I don't know. I reckon I'll go back to plowing them fields, and because I was way out in the country. And I said, I'll see you. And then we saw Texas Dirt get on the tractor, and he waved by, and I waved by to him. I said, I'm going to miss him. And he was singing Happy Trails to me. And that was the last time we ever saw Texas Dirt in a ring. And then, Dirty Dutch came back. It was an entertaining, they've had this gimmick before. Stagger Lee had it. Junkyard Dog.
Dusty did.
Dusty did it as a Midnight Rider. And used sparingly, it works. But used, if you can take a good thing and run it into the ground. That's what they've done to a lot of wrestling angles because they don't know what else to do. But anyway, Crash, I'm glad you enjoyed it. How did he say he was?
He didn't. He said he was only a kid then. So
under 10.
Let's say he was, under 10.
Glad you enjoyed it, Crash. So, hey, my books, you can get my book. So send me an email, Dirty Dutch Mantell with 2 L's @gmail.com.
There you go. He'll sell you a book at full price. Luke, hey Dutch, I'm a big fan of the channel. What's the bloodiest wrestling match you've ever seen?
Oh, I've seen a lot of wrestling matches that are bloody, and I can't pick out the bloodiest ones, but I remember some guys bled so much that they had to call the EMS in to stop it. Now, it wasn't me. Believe me, it wasn't me and sometimes I don't get it. I think some guys like to do it. You've heard of the cutters, but that's a mental problem, But some guys, they stock their whole reputation on the blood, on bleeding. So, and Abdullah and Brody, they used to have probably Carlos Colon. He made his money off blood. I've been in Puerto Rico sometimes, and sometimes as many as 4 matches would have blood. I said, damn, why don't we space this out a little bit and just have one so the people remember that was the only one instead of 4. But there was a lot of bloody matches. Ken and Sheik was another one. Cowboy Bob Ellis was another one. Of course, Abdullah and Brody. There was and probably Raven and ECW. He did it a lot, but there's been a lot of bloody matches. But I would say Brody and probably Abdullah, probably the bloodiest.
In a match that you've been in, you remember just thinking, geez, I mean, tone it down a bit with the blood, dude.
Well, I kind of discouraged it. I don't care how much the promotion wanted it. Because I thought one time, I said, listen, what if something happens to me and I got to go out and get a job? I'm doing this interview for the job, and they look up ahead. It looks like a Georgia road map. And they probably say, oh, there's the turn between I-4 and I-75. It looked just like a map. That's what I told Carlos one night. I was punching him in the corner, and I looked down at that head. I said, where do you want me to hit you? I-4, I-20. I don't think he knew what I was talking about. But I didn't never much like that at all.
We'll move on then. Buck Rogers, could you explain what the original etiquette was in the locker rooms in regard to handshaking and other things? Can you also discuss how it's evolved over time?
Well, protocol or courtesy, when you go in a room, you go up and you shake everybody's hand, especially if you're new. Now, after you've been there for a while, you don't have to do it. You can just come up and sit down. It's like being at a regular job. But if you go in on a new job, of course, you want to go meet everybody and let them know who you are, and you shake their hands. And the shake it's like a loose handshake. Because if you took a guy and he clamped down on you, that was the wrong thing to do, because that meant he was stiff. So, but Danny Hodge had what I understand to be the strongest handshake in the business. And I didn't know it one time. I didn't even know. Hell, I learned this business by actually falling in traps. And I'm in Knoxville one night, and Ron Fuller was there. He said, yeah, have you met Danny? And I hadn't met Danny Hodge. I said, no, I haven't. And I put my hand in it, but I'm trying to do it loose. Well, he grabbed my hand hard. And he started cranking down on that thing. And I was going, God, I hope he lets go. Brother, he almost broke my hand. And then Ron saw it. He said, oh, no, he's playing with you. He's playing with you. Man, because this guy, the strongest hands I've ever seen. He's the one who used to take an apple on TV and squeeze it and to make it the juice come out of it. It takes a pretty strong handshake to do that. But Danny, to his credit, if he wanted to, he could break your neck. He could break your arm. He could do anything because he was that good of an amateur shooter. But the nicest guy you ever want to meet. And even he's passed away now, but even up to he was 80, he was still in good shape, still had the handshake.
There's a famous story that Jim Ross says about him going into a hardware store and just snapping pliers like that. Did you see any more feats of strength like that?
Well, other than apples, no, but I've heard that. He would go in there and he would take the pliers and crank down on them, and he'd break them. And they look at him and say, of course, you don't see guys breaking pliers every day. So when he walked in there and he broke them, and they weren't regular pliers, they were the long pliers, he'd just break them. I can't imagine that. But he had tremendous hand strength. I guess they call tendon strength, I guess. Excuse me, but very strong in his hands. And a great, he was a national wrestling champion at the University of Oklahoma. So he liked Jack Swagger because Swagger was at the University of Oklahoma. And he used to call up and check with his dad, how's he doing? And he liked Jack a lot. Jack had a lot of respect for him.
I always heard that two other people that had very, very strong hands was Harley Race, because he could bend like a quarter or a penny or whatever with a thumb and forefinger, and also Gene Anderson as well. I think they're two people who've got very strong handshakes.
I could see Gene and Harley doing it, because those two guys were wrestlers, but nobody messed with them at all. Because Harley he may not have been a great wrestler, but he was a great fighter. I mean, I've heard of him getting in fights, and he'd fight 3 or 4 guys in a bar at the same time. And he kind of quit that as he got older. But, when Harley come in there, he didn't mess around. Now, Gene, I don't think Gene was that much of a carouser, but he had such a demeanor about him. You didn't mess with him. And I'll say one thing about him. Gene and Harley treated me nothing but respect, because they respected the wrestling business. They respected what it takes to get in it, how to be successful in it. And they treated me very well. And I appreciate that, especially when I was green. And I've never been one to bother young guys or kind of rib them and they weren't either. They would actually take up for if an old timer was messing with a young kid, they'd actually take up for the young kid and tell the old timer to leave him alone. Took one time, and guess what? It was over. And the guy would go back and sit down. And they need somebody like that in some of these dressing rooms. I used to.
I want to pick up on one more thing in this question. He says, how has, let's say, the handshaking evolved over time? And I've heard a podcast with whoever it was who said that in later years, young guys would not just shake hands with everybody in the locker room. They would interrupt your conversation if you're somewhere in the arena, like burst in. So, just want to shake your hand, just want to let you know I'm here, and then that kind of thing. And it was sort of like overkill on the handshaking. Does that ring true to you?
Maybe, but I never, considered it disrespectful. Actually, to me, it was more respectful than anything else, because if he had the guts to come in, and it's going to who you're talking to too, I'm sure. But I just want to meet you, and he takes off. Well, at least he shook my hand, and he may not have saw me in the dressing room. He may have saw me on the floor. He maybe saw me somewhere else, but he wanted to get the handshake in. And I guess because somebody told him, shake everybody's hand and don't be an asshole. And I think that's what he was trying to do.
Yeah.
Never bothered me.
We will move on.
Now, I wanted him to come over and say, hey, here's that 50 I owe you, even though I didn't owe him 50, but just give me $50. That would have been more memorable.
We will move on. Devil Eyes. Salutations, Dutch. My question. Who do you consider the greatest tag team of your territory days, and why? There's quite the list to choose from, so I'd really like to know your personal pick. Thanks.
Well, in my earlier years, when I first started, I would pick 2. The Assassins, which I thought were tremendous. And that was Jody Hamilton and Tom Ernesto. And people might remember Jody more than Tom, but they taught me timing, taught me story, and they weren't big, boastful guys. When they did their interviews, it was almost in a voice that you could say was deathly serious. They would never yell, they would never scream, and they would go out there and they just say what they were going to do, but then they'd go and do it. Of course, with a little bit of cheating, they would come out on top. I would pick the Assassins. A little bit later from them we were just talking about Gene Anderson. Mm-hmm. It was the Anderson brothers, Arn and Gene, and they worked a style similar to the Assassins. And they always worked the half ring deal. And that's where the announcers used to kind of connect. Their style was they kept their opponent in their half of the ring so he couldn't make a tag, which made absolutely a ton of sense. Because when he crossed that invisible line from the neutral corners to the other side, and he was getting close to a tag. And their strategy was to keep him as far away from tagging his opponent as they could, because now the fresh guy's going to get in there. So I picked go ahead.
Can I correct you slightly? You said Gene and Arn. Do you mean Gene and Ole for the Minnesota Wrecking Crew?
Gene and Ole.
There you go.
It was Gene and Ole. And great. They drew tons and tons of money, both teams, in mid-Atlantic territory. Now, the Assassins were in mid-Atlantic, which in the business we used to call the Charlotte territory. It was the Carolinas, and it was Virginia and part of maybe Kentucky, maybe the edges of it. But they drew tons and tons of money. But the Assassins were there first. And this goes back years and years ago. Even before me, they were the Bolos. That was their name. So when they took up the Assassins, and a fan told me one time, he says, "Who are those Assassins?" Because it was a big deal not to tell who they were. And I looked around like this. I went, "Well, don't tell nobody, but those guys are wanted for murder in California." He went, I said, "Yeah, so don't let it out." Because I think they shot some mafia guy, and he was connected to the police, and that's why they put the mask on. Are you kidding me? I swear to God. And he believed it. It's a good story because he wanted to believe it. And I bet when he went home that night, he said, "Dad, you know those Assassins killed a couple of guys in California, and they had to go on the run. That's why they come here and put the mask." I bet people, "Shut the hell up." "No, I swear. The Dutch guy told me." Okay, the next two I would say would probably be the Midnight Express. Because that Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton were working machines, literally machines. They didn't stop. They had that mouthpiece with Cornette, who could get an argument started with Mother Teresa, and they just had it all. Cornette run that mouth, and they do the work. And probably another team I would say would be the Rock and Roll Express, because they drew and again, we'll go back to the mid-Atlantic territory, and they drew a lot of money in Oklahoma territory. But the Midnight Express was put together, I think, in Tennessee, in Memphis. So was the Rock and Roll, or they may have had it in Texas. I'm not sure. But I think I know the Rock and Roll Express was put together in Memphis, because me and Lawler was going up the road one day. We could have been going anywhere. And he told me he had Robert and Ricky coming in and needed a name for him. We thought, and we thought, and we thought. And finally we stopped at, the regular stop, a convenience store, and we got gas or whatever. And I walked in, and we was looking at all those rock and roll magazines. And I saw one, and I can't remember the name of the guy now, but I said, "Why don't we put all those leotards and stuff and put some handkerchiefs around their," I didn't know what they call them, scarves around their leggings and all. And he said, "Hey, we could do that and call them the Rock and Roll Express." So, and I've heard two stories on that. I thought me and Lawler come up with it, and then Jimmy Hart told me him and Lawler came up with it. So who knows who come up with it, but it worked for them. And if I hadn't told it here on this story before, the first night they were the Rock and Roll Express, Robert Gibson was embarrassed to put it on. Boy, Ricky wore his ass out. I did too. I said, "Oh, put the shit on." I said, "They're not doing nothing with you as Robert Gibson. Put it on, get a different look." And it got over that night, and he never had trouble putting it on again. And he made a ton of money with that gimmick.
Sorry.
Those four teams are probably, I can't think of any now that would even come, well, they come close to them, but it was a different gauge. So I'll pick those four teams as top tag teams I've ever seen.
With the Midnight Express, the team was formed in Southeast Championship Wrestling and it consisted of Dennis Condrey and Randy Rose.
That was Atlanta.
And
I think that was Atlanta.
Let me have a look. Southeast Championship.
But it was just the name, the Midnight Express. But the movie had come out too. The Midnight Express, the movie. And I think that's where the name came from.
And the other thing is, when I was talking to Robert Gibson, I think this was off air, but I might as well just repeat the joke. As he said, he's just went, "How do you think I make my dick 12 inches?" And I was, "Go on, I fold it in half." Like, well done.
That sounds like Robert.
Okay, and we're back. And the next question is Bad Pippy. What are your memories of Shark Boy returning to TNA in 2008 as a Stone Cold Steve Austin ripoff?
Who asked this question? Bippy.
Bad Pippy.
Oh, Bad Pippy. Well, Pippy, I love Shark Boy, and I thought his Stone Cold Steve Austin impression was spot on. And I love that guy. But he worked a lot of places, but he never really became a member of the territory, so to speak, until I don't think he ever called on anywhere. But he had the tools. He had and I loved him when he started doing Stone Cold because that stood out. So he did that for a while. It was good. And I don't know why he didn't catch on more in other places than the times that I saw him. But I loved his work.
Did you come up with any words for him? Like, "Give me a shell, yeah," or anything like that?
Well, I had some. I said, "Hey, I did have some for him." It was just shrimp was one of them. Flounder. Don't flounder around. And I had a few more, and we started throwing those back every now and then. And I said, "You want to do an interview?" And, you use flounder and shrimp and, I don't know what else I put in there, but we actually had an interview when he had all the names of fish in there or seafood, but I can't remember what it was now. But he's very funny, very humorous, and great personality. I like that guy a lot.
Did you ever get a call from Steve Austin, like at the time, go, "Hey, what's going on out there?" You know what I mean? Like actually just gimmick infringement and a bit put out by it, maybe.
Well, no, I never got a call from him like that, but I don't remember talking to him on the phone, really. I just saw him at the TNA tapings, and we're there for 2 days.
Steve Austin calling you.
Oh, Steve Austin?
Yeah.
He did call me one time to do his podcast. This was years ago. I was already with the WWE, I think, and he was getting his podcast going, and I think he asked for me to be on his podcast. I wish he'd asked me now to be on his podcast, but he was just getting it started there, and it was his idea for me to do it because I wrote about him in my book that you can purchase by. No, but he was sent to me in Memphis, and I didn't even know who he was. I was booking at the time, and it was like December or something, and this was later on after WWE had kind of taken over all the territories. Business was horrible. So, and he came in. Have I told this story?
I think on a previous podcast, yes. Shall I refer to people to the clip? It's on the Storytime with Dutch Mantell YouTube channel. But
anyway, he came in. I didn't know him. We got in an argument. I gave him the name. He went out there. He had a match. It wasn't that good. It wasn't that bad though. And he came back and, "How'd you like my match?" And, "Oh, what was wrong with my match?" I said, "It'd be a lot easier to tell you what was right with it," because I'm just kidding him. And it didn't hurt his feelings. He didn't give a crap. And I told him, I said, "I want you to watch every match every night till you leave here." And I walked by about an hour later, and there he was. He'd already taken a shower. He was sitting there watching every match every night. And he said, that's how I learned to do stuff. I started watching. I became a serious student of what I wanted to do. And he says, thinking back, it's probably some of the greatest advice I ever got. So he knew that he had done a move in his match. If he sees a move in the next match, he would go up the next night and said, "Oh, I'll do that move a little later. So I just want to tell you." And but he would watch but when he started going on later, he would watch the earlier matches. So he wouldn't do what they would do because the people had already seen it. Now that's very hard not to do a move that another guy does because, other than the basic moves, I mean, the arm drags and the takeovers and legs and, the tackles and the tickles and the tackles and all that. But he watched that. And he said, okay, I'll resequence that. So it's not the same thing. So he studied the business. Not that he used it in his matches, because later on, he didn't have to use them because the character, it took precedence over everything. And see, a lot of guys work what the guys call great workers, but they were great ticket sellers. And that's what people look for. Screw the rest of them when it comes to making money. I don't give a crap where you know how to headlock from a wristwatch. If you can get people to buy tickets, you're on my card. Mm-hmm. Handsome Jimmy is the number one seller of that concept.
Man, he could. I love Handsome Jimmy. I mean, I loved it when I talked to him. I love watching him. The wrestling was like he'd dance down the ring. He'd dance when he was attacking somebody. He'd dance when he was registering a fence. He'd dance after the match. He's just an entertainment machine, that guy.
Well, that was his match. I brought him somewhere. Oh, I brought Sandman to Puerto Rico one time. And his big deal is going around and drinking everybody's beer while his music plays. And I forgot Sabio Vega was there. He says, why don't we just get right into the match? I says, listen, you can't take his entrance away from him because that's the match. And I said, right when he gets ready to finish it, you guys attack him. Then there's no drop, and we'll go from there. And he came back. We did that, came back, and Sabio looked at me. He said, well, that was the best advice I got tonight. He said, let him do it because people come to see that. They want to see him dance. But Jimmy, I saw him dance around the ring. He danced down, and he'd get in the ring, and he'd dance and hit his knee bumps, and he'd do something stupid, and people laughing. And they were having a hell of a time. Kids loved him. People just loved him. And then he'd dance out. That was Handsome Jimmy. That was his whole deal. If he could get that in, you got a good night in. So Jimmy, but if you met him in the dressing room, you wouldn't, if you put a mask on him or put him behind a wall or say a screen, you wouldn't know it's him. He's very low key, low tone. You ask him a question, he said, yeah, brother. It's almost like he didn't even raise his voice. I said, Jimmy, you okay? Yeah, man. Yeah. I love you, man.
He was so nice when I talked to him as well. I mean, I asked him one question, and then I didn't speak for the next 25 minutes. He just rattled off in his entire... And it was only about the first match he had with Jerry Lawler. And that went 25 minutes, and I just sat down and shut up and just let him go, and it was great.
Well, remember what I was talking about, I think last week, about Bray Wyatt. Mm-hmm. You got to make them think that this guy is something special. And Memphis was always good about that because they would promote the guy. Then he shows up with Jimmy Hart, which is putting another stamp on him that he's a big time deal. And him and Lawler, they drew some great houses. See, Lawler was always like the standby in Memphis. He was always there. And you saw a few of them around the country, like Dusty in Florida. If Dusty wasn't on the card, people didn't want to go see it. So he was over so much. Bruno in New York, or that area, if he was on the card, it was a big card. and you never saw Bruno on TV. I think you saw probably Dusty more on TV than you would some of them. But Handsome Jimmy, later on, you saw him on TV, but not that much because they held him back. I mean, they would use him at TV, but not necessarily at a match. And he would come out there and he'd do his interview and, yeah, daddy, this, that, and the other. And the people, if you're sitting there, say you're in Memphis, you're just sitting there and you're watching the wrestling show, and all of a sudden here comes Handsome Jimmy, the boy from New York City, and he goes around the ring, whether he's a heel or baby. People loved him anyway. It's entertaining. And you'd watch it, and then him and Jimmy Hart doing an interview. Oh, it's gold. You look at it, you say, and these guys, they didn't have a writer for them to write that stuff down. Jimmy was Jimmy, Valiant was Valiant, and Jimmy Hart was Jimmy Hart. And they would go out there cold and do an interview you thought they'd worked on for like 3 months. They just do their stuff, then they'd leave or whatever they had to do. And that's the part of being a pro. You could go out there with 30 seconds notice and turn it on. And that's what you look like, what you look for in wrestlers who can go at a moment's notice, because who knows when you got to go out there. But these guys were Jimmy Hart, tremendous. Jimmy Valiant, tremendous. They had another guy in Memphis called the Dream Machine.
Troy Graham.
Oh, that guy was tremendous. And he would do he actually did rapping before I knew rapping was a thing. But he did it like a white rapper. And he was over with those people. And he would go out there and he wasn't a great wrestler. He didn't have to be, but he was over. And I think he was one of Jimmy Hart's guys. And Jimmy Hart had what they call the family. And the family kept running their kinfolks off because we'd all come through there. Then he'd get rid of you because you didn't do the job. Then you turned babyface. Then you started fighting him. And they kept this up for like 5 years. And to keep heat like Jimmy Hart kept for 5 years is great booking and great talent. So when you put those two together, you have a winning combination.
Next question. CB Gavel. Did Dutch ever get to wrestle Demolition Axe and Smash either as a tag team or single matches? Any Barry Darsow or Bill Eadie or any favourite stories about them?
Well, I remember Eadie years and years and years ago. He wasn't Bill Eadie. He was one of the Mongols. And in answer to your question, no, I never wrestled them in single matches. We were always like, we were on the same side. But Bill Eadie was with one of the Mongols. And that was one of my, not the greatest tag team that I'd ever seen, like the Assassins or Midnight Express. But they were an unusual, noticeable tag team. Because when these guys got in the ring, you'd pay attention to them. Because that Bill Eadie, a pretty big guy. And his partner wasn't such a big guy, and they had the bald head with that little splash of hair coming out the back. They were different. And in being different, and like you got to keep in mind, I saw them in Georgia right when I started. In those little towns in Georgia, and it's like little towns everywhere, but you don't have people come to your town like that often that look like that. But they come to your town and you're thinking, if I'm a fan, I'm thinking, wow, where in the hell did they find these guys? Because it really makes wrestling fun. And when they walk out there, they're big, they're huge, they're hulking. And I may have said this before, with these earlier heels, they're not like heels today. Heels today weigh 190 pounds. They can get heat, but it's got to be not with their size. They got to get it with their mouth, but easier to get it with your size than it is your mouth, because the size speaks for itself. If you got to do it by mouth, now you got to actually work at it. But these little people in the little towns would sit back and look at these guys and say, dang, he's the biggest son of a bitch I've ever seen in my life. Now, they've seen big people, I'm sure, but these guys go in the ring, jacked up, and you didn't want to mess with them. They looked tough. They didn't have trouble going to the ring or back from the ring because people were afraid of them. Me, on the other hand, they could take a few shots at me because they didn't think I was too tough. But I did meet Bill Eadie, and a very smart man. And he after I got to know him just a little bit, he played football in college. I think a little pro ball. And so when somebody tells you this, and you think, well, how in the hell did you ease your way toward pro wrestling? And he told me he always liked it. And people used to tell him, hey, you look like a wrestler. And he said, I thought I'd try it. And I forgot how he got in. But he got in through, I think, the leader of the Mongols, I think,
is that Gito?
Gito, and what was his name?
Give us 1 second.
Yeah, his Russian name.
The Canadian Newton Tatry. Or are you talking Nikolai Volkov?
Volkov was, and I remember him when he was a Mongol too. And then Eadie came in later. So, pretty good little franchise. And they did well in Georgia. And I don't know, I think they went to WWF later on. And they did well. They did good there because they would fit the WWF more than they would fit a promotion in the South. Because I think people would buy them. Well, they buy them everywhere, but they really would fit in New York with all the talent they had.
We'll go next question. Casey, Dutch made my mum a believer. Around 1987 to 88 in Harlan, Kentucky, the Continental Wrestling Association had a show at Kaywood High School. Excuse me. During the main event battle royal, Dutch and Dr. Tom Pritchard were eliminated. Dr. Tom first and then Dutch. Dutch jumped Tom on his way back to the dressing room. They wildly brought up the aisle and near the bleachers. I remember my mother, not a wrestling fan, clearly saying, those two were really mad at each other. You made her a believer that night.
And where was this at?
Harlan, Kentucky.
And what high school?
Kaywood or Carwood?
Oh, Kaywood High School. Oh yeah. I do remember going there. You ever been back in the hills of Kentucky?
No.
Well, it's hilly and it's mountainous. Some of those roads are so curvy. You literally meet yourself going through the curves, going back the other way. I remember we did have I do remember this, and I'm glad I made her a believer. And I think we had a battle royal where me and Tom, we couldn't get along or something. And we kind of both got eliminated by the guy we were trying to get. And we were pissed off about it and went up and we milked it from the ring all the way to he's about ready to go. And then we just started, listening to the people. We weren't supposed to do that. We just did it. And the people popped some, and then we left. It's not something that was scheduled, because if it had been scheduled, we'd have had something on TV about it. We never did, but I'm glad we made your mom a believer. And tell her if your mom is still with us, I want you to tell her that Dirty Dutch says he still hates Tom Pritchard even today. And it started right here in Kaywood, Mom.
Any other Dr. Tom Pritchard stories? Because I've interviewed him a couple of times. He's a highly agreeable person. And apparently, sorry, I was going to add this as well. There's a saying going through the wrestling business that has been for years, apparently, is that I'd take a bullet for Tom and I'd put it in Bruce.
That's true. Yeah. Tom is the complete opposite of Bruce. Bruce, he's for Bruce. Tom, he's not wired that way. He just wants to get along, and I love Tom Pritchard, and I like Bruce too. But you got to know his drawbacks. So Bruce could actually hurt you. Tom he wouldn't even talk bad about you. But Tom Pritchard is probably, according to my friend John Layfield Bradshaw, is the worst driver in the wrestling business. The worst. So we had a flat tire one night, and at Bradshaw, he would get on Tom, speed up, God damn, you're the damn shittiest driver I've ever seen, blah, 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 blah. We had a flat tire, and we got out, and we was trying to change it, and it was cold, it was dark, and it was misting rain. The worst conditions you could think. We're on the side of the road. And Tom looked down at the hubcap, but it was like just for the a beauty hubcap, not really a hubcap. You just put it on. And he was trying to take the lug nuts off that. Of course, it's not a real lug nut. It's just nothing. It's just a cover. And then I tried it, and I wasn't paying attention. I tried the same thing. I said, well, I don't know what we're going to do now. And I remember Bradshaw got out of that truck, and he cussed us both out. Said, you lazy, no good for nothing bastards. You got to pull that off. And then he changed. then he undid it, and he said, there, that's the way you do it. And we got the spare out, and we put it on. I think he put that on too. So me and Tom sit back and then like, well, okay. But Tom legitimately didn't know. I knew, I just didn't want to do it. So we got Bradshaw out raising hell, and I put up with the hell raising, and he put the tire on for us. And he never let me forget it. You know how to change a tire? I thought Tom was dumb. You're almost as dumb too yourself, you bastard. Because he was kidding with it, but we got the tire changed. And Tom also had a fight on the side of the road, and I've told you this.
Yeah.
With Tracy Smothers, the cops come along. They tried to explain, well, we're just professional wrestlers. We're rehearsing a match. And they said, well, damn it, you can't do it out here on the highway. Now get in your car and get the hell out of here. And they let us go.
If it's not on the channel, I'll put it up soon. I promise you. A couple more questions. Yeah, we've got a few more minutes left. Charizard, has a wrestler bringing their wife into the business ever worked on both a personal and professional level?
Well, a lot of times bringing your wife around is asking for problems. There were some places that wouldn't even let you bring your wife to the matches. Because I don't know what the thought process was inside the office, but I think it was because they had a lot of girls coming to the matches. Because let's face what wrestling is. It's basically male. It's male burlesque. That's what it is. So a lot of women would come to look at the bodies. Of course, a lot of women would find their way back around the dressing room door. And they had some problems with this guy, or some guys, who had some relations with the girls at the matches. Then they brought the wife, and they found out who each other was. Then they started the big fight out there, and they had to separate them. And I think this was maybe Florida or the Carolinas. And they just banned all wives coming to the matches, because they said it caused more problems than it could possibly fix. And they said, if you get a divorce, that's your problem, not ours. So if you want to work here, keep your wife at home. So, I mean, it's a business decision. They can do what they want to do.
I've got some examples for you. Deborah McMichael twice, Miss Elizabeth, Karen Jarrett / Angle, Nancy Sullivan. I mean, just... the only one I can think of that actually sort of worked out both professionally and personally was Charmel and Booker T, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they worked out. But all the rest of them really didn't go, I don't guess. But there been others.
Miss Kitty, there's another one. Stacey Carter.
Yeah, she didn't work out. Don't get me going on her.
We, I don't know if this was on air or off air, but we did promise to do a bit about Stacey Carter or how she got into the business, and I never heard the story.
I can't tell the story here.
Okay then. I'll try and think of someone else then. I don't think there's anyone else who's really Missy Hyatt and Eddie Gilbert. No. Tammy and Chris. I know they weren't married, but that didn't work out.
Oh, what a train wreck that was. I met them in Puerto Rico. I met Chris. And they went down there, and they never admitted this to me, but I could tell who they were hanging out with. They was on drugs. Then they got fired from the company. Then they didn't have any money to go home on. And at one point, they were sleeping on the beach. At one point. Now, this was after, Tammy's WWF run. And there's all kind of stories about that, which is not really fit for consumption. Mm-hmm. I don't think, but it got really, really seedy, I would say. And Chris was the last to know. So I didn't tell him. No, none of them. I stayed out of it. I learned that a long time ago. If you're not involved in it, or it's not going to affect your bottom line, or you're not connected to the story, stay away from it. That's the best thing you can do. Stay out of the business.
Fine advice. Next one. Hominid CM Punk went on Twitter not too long ago to whine about Wrestler's Court. The concept that you created, saying Wrestler's Court was the most insecure, small dick, energy, average white man embarrassment to the wrestling business shit of all time. Now, clearly, your version of Wrestler's Court was a bit of fun, and it morphed into something else that... Anyway, so take that tweet and...
Okay, I did this years ago. I invented it because I was a big Judge Judy watcher. So we'd be going down the road, and we'd be in a debate, not an argument, but a debate about something. And the debate could be anything from romancing the rats to, any drinking, anything. And I'd call Wrestler's Court. Wrestler's Court. I was always a judge. And I did this with Undertaker first. And I put him on trial for, I think, romancing the girls around the matches. Because he denied it. So, and then I was the prosecutor and the judge. Of course, you knew I never lost a match. I never lost a case. Mm-hmm. And then Undertaker loved it. So he would say, Wrestler's Court. Then he'd put me on trial. He'd convict me for whatever I did. But they remembered. And then I think the Godfather came along. We did it with him and some of the other people. And, Stone Cold, he learned it. So that's how it got its way to WWE, the Wrestler's Court. But then when it got up there, and Bradshaw, he did it too. But when it got up there, either Bradshaw was the judge or Undertaker was the judge. And they would really try guys on kind of serious stuff. I started it as a joke, but it ended up like a pretty serious shoot. And for CM Punk to really say anything about it, what do you call it? Small dick what?
The insecure small dick energy. So is this something...
So he saw me take a shower. That bastard. I knew he was watching me.
So what's his problem with it then? Is it just...
Because he didn't invent it, I guess. See, I was watching the other day some nondescript, that's a good word, huh? I mean, nothing that will make this tape stand out except CM Punk was in wrestling camp, wrestling school. And they were showing him how to do a front row. He couldn't even do that. And I'm thinking, how did this guy, well, I know how he did it because he has some personality. But his wrestling skills weren't up to par with, starting out with the other first-year students that he was competing against. So I don't know why he came out and knocked family court. Probably because they convicted him several times on being an asshole, I guess. And he didn't like it. And he tried to appeal, and he turned his appeal down. So, and I don't know why he would come out like that. It's just a joke. and that's the way it was supposed to be. But I do think they maybe turned it a little bit more serious in WWE. And because when you have other guys that's not even being tried, they're pushing, advocating for somebody to be at wrestler's court. There's some heat there somewhere.
Mm.
And they would get to Undertaker or Bradshaw and convince them, we need to put that sumbitch on trial. Blah, blah, blah. Let's do it. And then it was a joke to everybody else, except the guy on trial, because then he saw, this wasn't going to be a joke. This is kind of a serious deal. And I have heard they've been several serious court dates that got just walked out on. People said, "I F this, I'm leaving," blah blah blah. And then when they leave, that was good. They got to see him blow up. And then of course, here come the verdict, guilty as charged. So, and then all the other guys, they would go tell him, well, they found you guilty anyway. So anybody who would allow themselves to be put on trial in wrestler's court, they deserve to be convicted.
Do you remember? Well, I was actually going to ask, do you remember hearing, because I don't think it probably got too serious while you were there in WWF in the mid-90s. It seems that it got more serious in the 2000s, but I remember still some silly ones like Teddy Long got convicted for selling Viagra to the boys when he got it for free on prescription. Yeah, there was other ones, but I think there was a serious one, or a few serious ones, like Mohammed Hassan, I think was the name. He was he was like a terrorist character.
Yeah, I know who he is.
And I think he got wrestlers caught, and it got pretty serious at one point, and he really got shunned by the locker room. Do you remember hearing any at the time that got a bit out of hand?
Well, I heard about those, but the Hassan guy, I think he had heat, and that's what got you to wrestler's court. If you didn't get along with that clique, they'd slam your ass in wrestler's court. See, a lot of people don't know that, but that's behind the scenes. But the implications of being on wrestler's court said a lot about your stature in the hierarchy. Because you didn't get none of the top guys going to wrestler's court. You didn't get Nash, and you didn't get Scott Hall, the kid, and all this. You didn't get those in wrestler's court, but you'd get the Hassans, and you'd get Teddy Long, and you'd get those. But Teddy Long, I can't believe that got serious, because I don't think he gives a crap. He'd laugh that off. But the Hassan kid, I think he had some heat with the dressing room. And when I was there, you could tell who had heat and who they let go. And if you acted too serious, if you weren't one of those top guys, if you acted too serious and you took your character a little bit more strongly than what your place called for, you could very well find your way at wrestler's court.
We will do one more, then I will thank you for your time. Rob from NYC. Hey, Dutch, big fan. Here's a few questions. Well, actually, there's only one question I'm going to ask you from him. Who do you think was the greatest manager of all time? If you cannot narrow it down to one, what would your top three be?
Well, Zeb Colter and Zeb Colter and Zeb Colter.
What about Uncle Zebekiah?
And he was kind of a jack-off. He just they never did anything. They never did anything with him, really.
Were you on the road? Were you on the road as Uncle Zebekiah? So you went, because at some point, I believe WWF stopped all managers from going on the road in like late 95. Is that true?
Yeah, I said, well, that was after I left.
Okay.
But if you see a manager on TV, you quite naturally expect to see him on the road, especially with the same guy, because they become a pair. They become a tag team, kind of, not necessarily a tag team, but they were always together. I would say the number one manager I ever saw, entertaining manager, was probably Bobby Heenan. Because he was a show unto himself, plus could work. You could do anything to him, but he was funny to listen to. And he was even funny later on, and I met him. I never met him but a couple of times, but he always remembered my name. Dutch, how you doing? Blah, 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 blah. Very good guy. I saw him after he got, I guess, cancer, and they had to do the surgery on his. But he was still Bobby, and he was still as sweet as he could be to me. But he could get heat. He was a heat magnet. Now you can see a lot of those managers in New York got it, like but I never really saw it. They had heat, but not heat that I would really enjoy. I would say the next one, Cornette. You can say what you want to about Cornette. I don't care what you say. That guy was a natural from day one because he's a talker, and he'll talk you into hating him. He just keeps on and on and on and on, and you feel like killing him. And I would, and the others are a kind of a mismatch of, I would say, for heat only, Gary Hart. Gary Hart in Texas. But see, Gary Hart, you never saw a light side of Gary Hart. You always saw the severe side. You always saw the hateful side. And that's what people got in their minds about Gary Hart. And when he'd do something, I mean, they really disliked that guy. I had a 6-man tag with him when I first went into Texas. And this was my only time, other than Memphis, that I worked with the Von Erichs. I was in a match in Houston, which is one of their main clubs. They don't call them towns, or they call it clubs. Some people would call it, the old timers would call it the Houston or a club. I was in a 6-man tag with Killer. God, I can't remember his last name now. I do that quite a lot, though. But I was in with Gary Hart, Killer, somebody I can't remember. His name. Good guy. No, not him. Beard and hair in Texas. Stayed there for years. Still can't remember.
No.
And the 3 Von Erichs with the old man in there. And it was actually a pretty good match. I think it was my first time in Houston. And people didn't know me from Adam's House Cat. But I went out there, and since I was with the Killer and I was with Gary Hart, I call it heat by osmosis. I mean, I was just heat by association. Because if I was with them, I couldn't be a decent human being. I had to be a piece of crap if I would associate with them. And this is on Sportskeeda, which let me plug the show one more time. Every Friday night, we do a Sportskeeda on Facebook, on Sportskeeda. Look it up. We do a live recap of SmackDown and Rampage every Friday night at 11:05 p.m. Eastern Time. Of course, it gets a little bit earlier the farther west you go. But I talked about guys that have our girls too, that have characters that they want to get over. And we came upon Ronda Rousey. And I says, first of all, Ronda Rousey goes to the ring trying to smile at all the people, but then gets in the ring and wants everybody to hate her. I said, I think they need to keep that character from the dressing room door, or what the door they come through, till they get in the ring. If you're going to be an asshole, look like an asshole. Treat the people like crap if you want them to boo you. But she comes out there smiling, and like Bianca Belair used to going to be running into the ring. She'd be out there skipping, her friend getting the crap beat out of her, but she's there doing her hair and skipping around. Get your ass to the ring. I don't know why WWE does that, but I think that's one of the worst things they can possibly do if they're trying to get a character over. And Ronda's over. And they asked me on the Sportskeeda, why did Liv Morgan win the title, lose the title? Because they got her over a little bit, but not enough to carry that title. because you can't put Liv against everybody, but you can Ronda. Ronda take them all on and probably beat their asses. But little Liv just wasn't. I think Liv is hurt by the presence of the Shayna Baszler. What's her name? Baszler, and she's hurt by Ronda Rousey because she's a cute girl, cute young lady, but nobody thinks she could beat Ronda Rousey. Nobody. So there you go from trying to be a model and look great to being a woman who can beat your ass. And that's what they're trying to get across with those last two. And that's why Liv lost the title.
Mm-hmm. We'll sort of wrap it up with the manager question. With Bobby Heenan and Jim Cornette especially, what is it with those two? Why did they have the magic formula of being incredibly entertaining yet retaining their heat constantly? But I mean, I know you're doing the talking, but all managers talk, but why was it they could just be incredibly entertaining and yet still be hated? What did they do differently to everyone else?
Well, they were with good heels. I mean, you could put them with a heel that people kind of liked and it wouldn't match up. But put them with, Heenan had the monsters. He had the big bad, like he had the two cowboys there one time. It was Wyndham and Black Jack Lanza and whoever, and they were heels. And then if they brought, say, Abdullah, he'd be with Abdullah. And he was like Jimmy Hart. Oh, I got to put Jimmy Hart in there. Jimmy Hart's got to be in there. He's probably in second, Cornette in third. But they were the resident managers to bring people in. Now, Memphis ran on one theme, basically, and it was Lawler and Jimmy. Because Jimmy used to manage Lawler. Lawler broke his leg. And Jimmy went out there one day, and I may have said this about breaking his jaw. He said, well, they shoot horses, don't they? And apparently that made Lawler mad. So not right away, but when Lawler came back, he broke Jimmy's jaw. And I know Lawler throwing the punch. He has precise precision in his punches. And he could only break somebody's jaw if he wanted to. I mean, he couldn't break my jaw, but he was as light as a feather. So I meant to tell me that he was. It's called a receipt. He gave Jimmy a receipt. Now, if you talk to Lawler, he'll deny it. Jimmy will deny it because I was just with them 2 months ago, and they're still big buddies. They went to high school together, so their friendship goes back a long, long time. But what are you saying? What made Cornette and
yeah, I mean, especially
Heenan and Jimmy,
especially with Bobby as well, is that he appealed to the kids. He could be like family friendly, amusing and entertaining, yet still be hated and draw money.
He's irritating. Let me say that. He's irritating, and you like him you say, oh, that son of a. Of course, you knew he was going to do it, and he would bring all the bad guys out that were going against their favorites. He would bring them in, and he was always there. See, Memphis ran off Lawler and Jimmy Hart, and Florida ran off Dusty and whoever he wanted to wrestle, and Bruno in New York is the same deal. They kept in Von Erichs in Texas. It all ran off the theory of you keep the resident baby faces and run the heels through. And it worked like that for years and years and years. Say, if a heel come into Memphis in January, I could tell you when he was going to finish. If he had the run with Lawler, he'd finish about September. He'd give him 9 months, and him and Lawler would do everything they're going to do. And then all of a sudden, they'd have this other, what they call dragon, sitting out there breathing smoke. And by the time he disposed of that one dragon who had bothered the kingdom for the last 9 months, when he got rid of him, now here comes the other fire-breathing dragon to do the same process all over again, but with a different character. And it worked like that for years and years and years. And all wrestling is good versus evil, good versus bad. It's almost biblical in the sense that it's right versus wrong. And it's worked for years and years and years, and it will still work today because every movie has an antagonist. Every movie has a protagonist. You got the good guy and the bad guy, and it usually ends with the good guy reigning supreme, standing tall over the kingdom, bringing peace back. So when a movie ends when the bad guy wins, you go, it's kind of a letdown feeling.
But there's also a couple of examples like Heat or Terminator, the original Terminator, where the bad guy's so good, so cool in a sense, that you want to see the bad guy win, but you still stick around to the end of the film.
Well, there he is, but that's a different type movie. But that tells you one thing, and you can actually see wrestling heels like that too. You kind of like them, and the people turn them babyface. Because if you're out there and you're trying to be a heel, and the people are kind of cheering you, if the bookers listen, they got to say, well, trying to put heat on this girl, maybe or this guy might be a little bit harder to do than what I thought. So they just turn them babyface. Don't fight your customers. Listen to your audience. Get the temperature of the room. They'll tell you what they want. I mean, I used to do it in Puerto Rico. I'd go out there or even Memphis, wherever I was booking, and I'd listen to the people. And they would tell me what to do next. I didn't go back and say, oh, my God, I don't know what. I said, well, hell, this guy here, I'm going to turn him. And now you know you're going to make them happy. Now, if they like him, now you bring a bigger heel is that's going to do something to him. Now, see what you got. All wrestling is a guessing game anyway. You can say, well, if I do this. And how many times have I said this? It's not the first thing you do. It's the second thing you do. Because if the second thing doesn't follow the first thing, you're back where you started, maybe worse off. You've already burnt the angle. So there's only 7 finishes in there's only 7 finishes in wrestling. It's like seven story endings.
To close off the podcast, for God's sake, this camera's so blue. I keep putting my phone in the way to sort of like try and reset. There we go. Reset the sharpness on it. I don't know what's going on. Bill Eadie said some great advice when he turned, probably with Demolition, is when he turned from heels to baby faces, and he was asked, so what did you change about the characters to make them baby faces? And he said, nothing. Because they were cheering us as heels because they liked what they saw. You don't change anything about your character. So if you do, then you're not what they cheered for in the first place.
Right. You don't change nothing because they can't be cheering for what you might be. They're cheering what they like now. And I could see how they could be babyface. But them being baby faces, they got to have some badass, kick-ass heels to even match up to them. That's the only drawback to it, because they were two massive guys, and all of a sudden you don't turn babyface against like a team weighs 200 pounds. People don't believe it, because then you go in there, and if the little team beats the big team, guess what you've done? You've killed both of them. You've killed the team you're trying to get over, and you kill the other team that you want to get over also. So you kill them both. See, wrestling it's not hard, but it's not easy.
Absolutely. With that, we are going to shut down the podcast. I'll get some plugs out. Owen Hart and the Rock books on Amazon. Links are in the description. They're the ones I've wrote. 2 books from Dutch as well. His website will hopefully be up soon. T-shirts and Pro Wrestling Tees will be up soon, hopefully as well. But if anyone wants signed books or a diploma from the University of Dutch, what do you have to do?
Just email me, Dutch Mantell, 2 L's, at gmail.com and ask me about it. I'll get right back to you.
Is it Dirty Dutch Mantell at gmail.com?
It is Dirty Dutch Mantell. Yes, it is.
So there you go. So if you want your signed merchandise, that's where to go. And we will be back next week with another podcast. Thank you for watching, and thank you, Dutch, for entertaining us once again.
Thanks.